There is a test you never knew you were taking. It arrived without a timer, without a proctor, without any announcement whatsoever. It came disguised as the worst period of your life. Wrapped in confusion, profound loss, and that particular exhaustion that settles deep into your bones when you have carried something heavy so long. You have forgotten what it feels like to put it down. It looked like failure, it looked like the end of everything. But while you were doing everything in your power simply to survive, you did not realize that surviving was exactly what was being asked of you. You passed. Do not take that as a motivational phrase printed on a greeting card. Take it as a literal, objective description of something that actually occurred. You are here. You made it through a passage that, at certain moments, you genuinely were not sure you would survive. Most people will offer you a thin understanding of what happened. It goes like this. You went through something hard, you endured, you survived, and now things might improve. That narrative is not wrong. It is simply extraordinarily shallow. If you stop there, you carry the weight of everything you endured without ever understanding what it was truly for. You move forward without knowing what was placed into your hands during the crossing. You completely miss the inheritance embedded inside the difficulty itself. To understand the specific mechanics of how this works, we must look through three distinct lenses. Developmental psychology, to understand the human capacity to shatter and reorganize. Quantum mechanics, to see the relationship between collapse and the emergence of new reality. And ancient wisdom traditions, to map the universal blueprint of human initiation that has existed across thousands of years of isolated cultures. In developmental psychology, there is a concept known as post-traumatic growth. It sounds like a phrase invented to make suffering feel acceptable, but the decades of research behind it, pioneered by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, is substantial and specific. They discovered that a distinct subset of people do not merely recover from severe adversity. They emerge from crisis with entirely new capacities, expanded perspective, radical purpose clarity, a high tolerance for ambiguity that previously felt unbearable. The critical realization is that the break itself is not incidental. The break is the mechanism. The framework that shattered was sitting on top of something deeper. When it collapsed, what lived underneath finally became visible. The test was never measuring whether you could hold your old framework together under pressure. It was measuring precisely what would be exposed when the surface finally gave way beneath you. This is the layer that standard therapy, mindset work, habit redesign, and manifestation practices can never quite reach. All of those tools operate at the level of belief and behavior. But if the underlying pattern is installed deeper than those tools can access, you can spend years applying surface fixes only to watch the same loop return wearing entirely different clothes. The longer you work exclusively at the surface, the longer that deep layer keeps quietly generating the exact same life. What your impossible test accomplished was something none of those tools could replicate. It reached beneath the installed patterns and contacted the raw, unmediated structure of who you actually are, when everything constructed on top of it has been completely stripped away. That contact is irreversible. You cannot unknow what pressure revealed about your own fundamental capacity. To understand why the old framework had to break, we look to the foundational crisis of modern physics known as the measurement problem. Before a quantum system is observed, it exists in a superposition of states. It is not in one definitive position. It holds all possible states simultaneously. Then a measurement event occurs and the wave function collapses. What was a field of simultaneous possibilities resolves into a single, definite actuality. Physicists fiercely debate why this happens, but none dispute the core mechanic. Measurement forces the transition from potential to actual. Before the impossible thing landed on your life, you existed in a personal superposition. Multiple trajectories and different versions of yourself were all simultaneously suspended in the probability field of your existence. Comfort allows you to remain nestled in the middle of the distribution, where all the ordinary versions of yourself quietly cluster together. It takes a measurement event of massive magnitude to force a collapse all the way to the absolute edge of the distribution, the precise place where your extraordinary version actually lives. The crisis was your measurement event. It forced a collapse of the old superposition, and what locked into actuality was a version of you that could only ever be accessed through that specific, unrepeatable pressure. Pleasant circumstances maintain superposition indefinitely. Comfort keeps all possibilities suspended, which feels safe, but prevents any single extraordinary version from ever fully resolving into reality. The collapse felt like destruction because the surface self experiences the loss of its familiar structure as annihilation. But beneath that experience, something entirely different was occurring. A version of you that previously existed only as potential was being forced, by the sheer magnitude of the event, into definite, irreversible actuality. To understand what happens to your worldview after the collapse, consider the story of an old cartographer named Elias. He spent his entire life crafting precise, breathtaking maps from the city where he was born, synthesizing reports from navigators worldwide. He believed his map of the world was complete. Then a legendary navigator named Soren returned from the southwest with a terrifying report. Where Elias's map showed open ocean, Soren found a massive landmass. Where Elias's map showed solid continent, Soren found a navigable passage. The entire southwestern quadrant was completely wrong. Elias's ego defended itself in predictable phases. First, he questioned Soren's instruments. Second, he questioned Soren's sanity. Third, he found a lesser navigator whose data confirmed his old maps, feeling instantly vindicated. But 3 years later, 5 independent fleets returned confirming Soren's coordinates. The landmass was real. The map was catastrophically wrong. Elias fell into a 6-month state that looked identical to severe depression. He stopped drawing entirely. He sat surrounded by his masterpieces, refusing to touch ink. To his friends, it appeared to be a total breakdown, but it was not. Elias was performing the hardest task a cartographer can ever endure, allowing himself to genuinely not know. He resisted the desperate urge to quickly patch the southwestern corner with new data, just to reclaim the comfortable illusion of completeness. He stayed in the emptiness long enough to ask the question beneath the question. If this section was wrong, what else is? What assumptions have I inherited that I have never examined because I never had a reason to? At age 53, a man who had never been to sea boarded a ship. He spent 4 years facing raw territory directly. When he returned, he did not produce a corrected version of his old map. He produced a completely different kind of map altogether. The new map did not show static coastlines. It mapped deep underwater currents. It detailed seasonal variations. It marked the precise places where the shifting color of water revealed unseen depths below. It was a map of layers, not surfaces. Navigators who sailed by it noticed an eerie difference. The new map did not simply show them where to go. It seemed to anticipate exactly what they would encounter from the inside out. When asked about it, Elias simply remarked that the old map was a map of what he was told, and the new map was a map of what he found when he stopped trusting what he was told and went to look for himself. The worldview you operated within before your test was an inherited map, built from what you were told about who you are, what you deserve, and how the world actually works. Your impossible test revealed a fundamental section of that inherited map to be completely wrong. The period where you sat in the wreckage feeling empty was your time in Elias's studio. It was not failure. It was the dissolution of the old map making space for a 3-dimensional understanding of reality that the old map could never have contained. Where the old map showed theoretical capacity performed for the validation of others, the new map shows absolute, unshakable capacity tested and proven under maximum pressure. Where the old map showed distraction by the superficial noise of ordinary life, the new map shows a radical reordering centered strictly around true signal, presence, meaning, and genuine connection. Where the old map showed uncertainty as a terrifying problem requiring rigid planning, the new map reveals uncertainty as the natural field of potential where the next layer of reality is waiting to emerge. If the mechanics of this process belong to physics and psychology, the intention belongs to ancient wisdom. Across thousands of years, historically isolated cultures mapped this exact psychological landscape using an identical 3-part blueprint: ordinary life, followed by dissolution and symbolic death, followed by transformation and return. The Sufi tradition describes the total annihilation of the ego self, never as tragedy but as an act of ultimate mercy, because the surface self is merely a veil concealing what is infinitely real. Christian mysticism describes the dark night of the soul, a period of profound aridity where everything previously relied upon for comfort is systematically withdrawn, not as punishment, but as an emptying out to create a vacuum where something deeper can finally live. The structural reality across all traditions is unanimous. The test is a precision instrument, perfectly calibrated to dissolve the exact layer of the false self currently blocking your true development. The Kabbalistic and Japanese traditions both note that a broken vessel, when repaired with gold, is significantly stronger and more valuable at its fractures than the original piece ever was. The break is explicitly highlighted, not hidden or apologized for. An easy test cannot reach the layers that needed dissolving. Only an impossible one carries sufficient force to penetrate that deeply. This is not a cruel design. It is a precise one. The difficulty was not disproportionate to what needed to be reached, it was exactly proportionate. Every element of what you endured was calibrated to the specific layer of inherited false structure that was sitting directly on top of your actual capacity. Nothing excessive occurred. What felt like destruction from the surface perspective was, from the deeper perspective, the most targeted and efficient act of development that your particular configuration required. In quantum field theory, a vacuum state, the absolute lowest possible energy state, is never truly empty. It is a highly active field of virtual particles and quantum fluctuations, constantly arising and subsiding below the threshold of direct observation. This is proven macroscopically by the Casimir effect, where two uncharged metal plates placed in a vacuum are physically forced together by the sheer pressure of external quantum fluctuations. The vacuum pushes. When your surface identity was stripped away, you did not drop into a void of nothingness. You dropped into your own quantum vacuum, the baseline of bare, unbroken awareness that witnessed the entire collapse without being dissolved by it. That witnessing awareness was never constructed. It was never installed by your environment or inherited from your culture. It is what you actually are beneath every layer that was built on top of it throughout your entire life. Now that you occupy this new ground state, your navigation system must fundamentally alter. The surface self navigates exclusively by cognitive thinking, comparison metrics, and calculated outcomes. The deeper self navigates strictly by resonance and alignment. Guidance from this depth will rarely arrive as a loud, explicit instruction or a dramatic external announcement. It arrives as a quiet somatic pull in the body before the mind can explain it. An immediate sense of aliveness in one direction and absolute flatness in another. Coincidences that feel less like accidents and more like structural arrangements emerging from the field itself. Learning to trust this navigation system requires dismantling the deeply conditioned belief that only cognitive analysis produces reliable guidance. The surface mind was trained to distrust anything it cannot immediately explain. The deeper self operates in precisely the territory that explanation cannot yet reach, which is exactly where the next layer of your reality is being assembled. This brings us to the most misunderstood archetype in human history, the chosen one. At the surface level, being chosen sounds like an exclusive hierarchical status, a sign of divine favoritism. But beneath the surface, across the deeper mystical layers of Kabbalah and Hindu philosophy, being chosen has absolutely nothing to do with superiority. Selection is about function, not status. You are not chosen to be elevated above others. You are selected because your particular configuration, your specific broken and repaired ground state, has been aligned with a non-generic function that only you can execute. No one else carries your exact fracture pattern repaired with your exact gold. No one else's collapse produced your precise new map. The function that emerges from your specific alignment cannot be replicated by anyone who did not undergo your specific measurement event. This is not metaphor. This is structural specificity operating at the level of your actual configuration. Because your path is now hyper-specific to your alignment, the comparison trap and the timeline trap completely lose their power. The surface mind demands rapid, visible progress because delay feels like an existential threat to its fragile structure. But depth understands patience. It is not busy maintaining a facade, it is busy unfolding a reality. If you feel suspended in a period of emptiness between what was and what has yet to emerge, understand that you are not behind. You are not failing. You are not being overlooked. You are letting the new ground state stabilize. You are in the highly fertile generative winter of the quantum vacuum. where the next form of your reality is assembling below the threshold of what the surface mind can currently observe or measure. What has been revealed under the pressure of the dark cannot be hidden again. You have surrendered the superficial map. You finally possess the depth.